At the end of the last presentation, I mentioned there were 1,817 prophecies. We have looked very briefly at one of them. In this presentation, we will look at one more in addition. I want to take you back to the great year of 1999. As you already know, I was living in Brisbane. I was working as a programmer. And in light of the end of the millennium, me and my best friend decided we're going to go on our first overseas trip. The plan was to go to Europe and backpack around and see as much as we can in 6 weeks. And these are the places that we wanted to go, and we went. The only problem is we realized that it was winter and it was cold. But as we were preparing for this trip, this big first overseas trip, we had to go to the real estate agent, what do they call themselves? Travel agents. We don't use those people anymore. We used to go to travel agents, and we had to sit down and tell them what we want to do, where we want to do it. They would clank away on an old keyboard and tell you, here's your options. Now, she could tell that this was our first trip, and so she said, have you boys got your traveler's checks? What's a traveler's check? It looks like this. It's a piece of paper that represented around about $50 US or $100 US. You'd go to your bank here in Australia, give them a bunch of money, they would give you these traveler's checks. You'd take them to whichever country you went to, and if you wanted to go out to eat or buy something, you would give them a traveler's check, sign it over, and they would give you the difference in local currency. Because back then, there was a different currency in every single country, in Europe particularly. Now, if you didn't live in the time of traveler's checks, you are blessed. Because now, what do we use when we go traveling overseas? We use a piece of plastic, generally speaking. But that plastic story that we're used to today in 2025 started in 1999. Because what happened in 1999, there was a new era in banking. So see, we booked those tickets, we got our traveler's checks in about March 1999, but by the time we got to September, and we were leaving in November, in September, I get a letter from my bank at the time that said, congratulations, Mr. Bergen, you are now the proud owner of this brand new key card issued by the bank. And what makes it so good is it's got a plus logo. And the reason the plus logo is so important is because for the first time in human history, you can use your local ATM card in Australia in any ATM in the world that has one of these plus logos. Because there was something called the internet. And the internet allows us to do real-time data integrity checks with security and PIN numbers and account balances. And so now you're able to use your card. I was both excited about how fast human technology was advancing in the 1999, but I was also pretty annoyed that I just put all my money into traveler's checks. So when I went to Europe, this was the year before the Eurodollar came in, I went to every single country. You know, some people get postcards for souvenirs. I got bank statements because I wanted to get a bank statement in Barcelona that showed that I was a millionaire in pesos. I wanted to go to Italy and to Rome and get a bank statement that said I was a millionaire in lira. And then I went to London and got a bank statement that showed I was below the poverty line. The exchange rates are horrible for Australians now, especially with the Eurodollar. So something big was happening in the 1990s. Because of technology, things were coming together, and one of the first things to benefit was the financial sector. In the early 90s, there was a very influential political commentator named Thomas Friedman. As far as I know, he's not religious. I don't know for sure either way, but what I'm going to share with you is not showing it as a religious perspective. It's purely just a really smart guy who was I think he was an advisor to the Bill Clinton administration when he was president on global policy, on foreign policy in the Middle East and in Asia. So he's a smart guy. He's a bestseller. I think he's still alive, but the book that made him famous was this one called The Lexus and the Olive Tree, which was published in which year? 1999. You see, the 90s were amazing. So much of the foundation that you all experience today was laid in the 1990s. In this book that he wrote called the Lexus and the Olive Tree, he's basically talking about this concept of how we have olive trees that are, like some cases, 3,000 years old, 4,000 years old traditions, and the way they harvest is still old. But on the other side, we have the Lexus, which was a very brand new sports car coming out of Japan. And the technology and the processes were very, very different, but he said, we are coming into a world that is globally connected. His term was global village. We're entering into the era of a global village. Today we would call it globalization. And so this book is a complete, it's like a Bible amongst some of the economic circles looking at how the world will reach and achieve globalization. Again, just a really smart guy's observations in the 1990s. In this book, I will save you reading it, there are 3 main points that he sees. If these 3, he calls them factors, driving factors. If these 3 factors continue on the trajectory that they were in the 1990s into the future beyond the 2000s, we will be, without any doubt, in a global village. This is the conclusion of his book. Here are the 3 factors. Number 1, he says, if we continue down this path where technology is becoming accessible, democratization technology. See, in the 1980s, my grandfather had a business in Sydney, a small business, and he had some computers had a computer for the processing of accounting and those sorts of things. And that computer cost him 15,000 Australian dollars in the 1980s. That computer is dumber than your watch today. But it was the latest and greatest thing. And you know how many people had them? Very, very few people who knew how to write them off a tax for business in the 1980s. But by the 1990s, in fact, by 1993, he gave me that computer as a gift for me to play around. That's why I became a programmer. Because he replaced it with something double the speed, double the power, and for half the price. Because if you know anything about the 1990s, it would seem like every 3 months, technology was getting better and faster and cheaper. And so in his book, he says, if we keep down this trajectory as we go through time past the 2000s, if technology gets faster and cheaper, more people will have access to it. Does that make sense? Would you say he predicted that? And again, not a prediction in a religious way, but an observation. Do you think he got it right? 100%. My smartwatch here is faster than my first computer in the 1990s. And it costs about the same today. But anyway. So the point was, he says, hey, if we get in this path where everyone has access to technology, we're going to be in a connected world. The second factor he saw was the democratization of finance, which means this. People aren't going to get richer, but they're going to have access to more money. Think about this. When I was a kid in the 80s, I wanted a typewriter. I wanted nothing in the world more than a typewriter, a Brother typewriter. You know what a typewriter is? About 5 of you know what that was. It's basically a keyboard with a ribbon. And you hit it, ding, 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 and it stabs the ribbon, like my description. Stabs the ribbon onto the paper and it makes ink. And you have to hit it. Anyway, it was fantastic. That's all I ever wanted. I was about 8 years old and I wanted that thing so bad. And it was $110 in 1980. And so my parents said, sure, you can do your chores, you can save the money, you can buy it. So I got to about $20 savings. I was about 8 or 10, however old I was. And my mum said to my dad, why don't we go lay-by it for him? And I was like, oh, lay-by. We went down to, it was in Kmart. We got the typewriter out of the case. We went, I was like, I got the typewriter, I got the we're lay-buying. You go down to the back counter. They don't even exist anymore, these counters. You go, I think they don't exist. You go down there, you put the thing on the thing that you want, and they go, well, thank you. How much money do you have? $20. I saved up for like a year of all the mowing the grass for $1 a day, $1 a week, and lots of stuff. Anyway, so I give them my $20. They say, thank you very much. They write out a receipt and say, you owe how much more? I said 110 minus 20. I want to see how smart you are with maths. $90. Very good. You owe us $90. Now, we'll see you next week for a repayment. I'm like, yeah, but with the typewriter, when do I take? No. It's lay by the back of the shop until you come and get it with all the money. But anyway, at least I knew that somewhere in that shop, that thing had my name on it. It was painful, an entire year of trying to pay that thing off. My kids' generation don't know lay-by. You know what they know? Afterpay. You know what afterpay is? It is the opposite of lay-by. You walk out of the shop with it and you leave no money there. The world has made it more accessible to money. It doesn't mean you're rich, it just means you're in debt more. But here's what he proposes in the book. He proposes that we're going to get easier access to money. And guess what he proposes we will do with that money? We will spend the money on technology. Do you know I have been to the poorest countries on this planet? And you know what they've all got? Brand new smartphones. They have leaped. They didn't buy computers. because their phones are far more superior than computers. The same way that in parts of Africa, especially South Africa, they didn't bother with banks, they went straight to phone banking. So his point was, people will get access to money, they will use that money for technology, and I guarantee you, every person in this room has got some sort of smart device in their possession. I think he got it right. Here's the third thing he said. If we have technology, or if we have money to buy technology and we have the technology, what it will do ultimately is it will democratize the game of information. In the 1980s and 1990s, I remember going to every Sunday morning like it was church, but it wasn't church, but we would get up, my dad would drive us down to the newsagents. They used to have those back then. You'd go to the newsagents at the front, there used to be the big grilly metal-looking grid thing, and then behind it was that day's paper, newspaper. You all look at me like, what on earth are you talking about? You used to have a newspaper, the Courier Mail. And you used to walk there, you pay, whatever, I forget how much it cost, but you pay your money, you walk out with a paper, and then you wouldn't see Dad for the rest of the week because he'd be reading the paper. And that paper was the source of information. And then if you were really allowed as a kid to stay up late, you'd see the 7:30 report. That was only for the adults because it was all the world news. My point's this. We got information as it was given to us by the publishing moguls of the world. But he could see, in this book he says, with the advent of the internet, now remember this, in 1999 there was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no Instagram, there was definitely no TikTok, there was no video services, it was basically eBay, and Google had just started. But he said, if this happens, we're going to have access to information at our fingertips. You know, it's so powerful now. My son's sitting here, I tell the story a lot. He likes to know things immediately. And I could be driving in the car and he looks at us, there's a bird over there. I go, oh, it's a bird with two wings. They go, what kind of bird is it? I don't know. Well, let's take a picture and Google it. That's the generation that lived, because access to information is now democratized. I used to have to go to a library with a cranky old lady who would send me down to this back corner to go to section something on something shelf to pull a book out. And I'd have to then read looking for the bird. The world has changed. So I think he got it right. He said in the 1990s, if we keep on this path, we're all going to have money to buy technology and we'll be informationally connected. Are we there yet? Yeah. Absolutely. Now, in this book, he makes two other astounding statements. He says, this is what I think is going to happen based on where we're heading, but if this happens, I have two fears. If we end up in a world where we're all connected because we have technology because we can buy it, there's two fears I have. Here are his fears. Number one, there is a very real possibility that there will be economic control. Because the world will be informationally connected and technologically connected, there'll be a danger that one individual, or worse, one organization will have absolute control of the economy. This is in 1999. The second thing he says, the fear is that there is a very real possibility that we'll have a global economic collapse because we'll be connected with the information and our technology and with our finances. So that sets the scene. Remember this story, we'll come back to it at the end of this segment. When people think about prophecies, now like I said very clearly, this is not a prophecy, it's him making observations. He's not trying to be religious at all. But when you think about from a religious perspective, is there anything that talks about finances in a prophetic sense? Most people have been pre-programmed from the mainstream media and the Hollywood-type places to think of economic prophecy in a religious sense as being very specific. For example, you'll see some movies coming out of the Christian Hollywood section talking about how that at some point people will get these little RFID chips the size of a piece of grain of rice inserted under your skin. They call it the mark of the beast. You've heard that in some movies. Other movies talk about how that there are going to be barcodes on people's heads. In fact, I remember when I was probably about 7 or 8, barcodes came in the shops. And I remember my parents talking about how they thought it was government control. They wanted to know how many baked beans you were scanning or something. People thought it was the mark of the beast. Now, we're going to center this segment of this prediction. We're going to look at one of those 1,117 predictions. that comes from the island of Patmos. I had the privilege of being there just the other day, and this is the picture coming around the corner into the island. That's the main Patmos environment there on the island. Now, Patmos, if you've never heard of it, it's in the middle of the Aegean Sea, which is basically off the coast of Greece and off the coast of Turkey. And it was a Roman penal colony. Think of Australia, but very, very small. That's what its point was. It was to send the bad dudes there so they couldn't get off, because swimming 27 miles is a long way to swim in the Aegean Sea. So they dumped people there, and basically they couldn't influence anyone. So on this island, they dropped a person called John. We call him today John the Revelator. Some Bibles will call him St. John the Divine. Basically, he was a follower of Jesus, and after Jesus had ended that part of the story, John's one of the apostles running around talking about Jesus. The Romans had enough of him, and they put him on this island of Patmos to stop him from influencing people and getting them to convert to being followers of Jesus. So the story goes that John lived down in that little town. There was probably about 200 people there. This is around 97 AD, so just under 2,000 years ago. So John would live in that little town. He'd walk up the hill here, and where this church is now, they're built, inside there is a cave where it's believed that John claims he received the vision of the book of Revelation. This is the cave here. It's about this high, so you've sort of got to bend down to go in there. And they believe that he would put his head against the rock, like in prayer there, and he'd put his hand in that crevice to stand up, and that's why they've covered everything as an ornament. And this was the cave. They call it the Cave of the Apocalypsis, which is what we get Revelation in English from, the Greek word apocalypsis, which means to reveal. And in this prediction, John claims that he received a picture of the future from 97 AD down to the end of time. So it's called, as I said, the Book of Revelation. Now, this book, which spans, it spans to, we don't know how long yet. It's 2,000 years to here and a bit more into the future, more than likely. And in this Revelation, what we essentially get is one big story. The one big story is this, that there is a war between the forces of good and the forces of evil, between truth and error, between life and death. And the Bible describes it in the book of Revelation as a cosmic conflict. That's the overarching story. But like any good story, to tell that story, there are subplots. There are twists and turns in the story, but they all support the overarching story. The problem if you read Revelation for the first time, or at any time, if you jump halfway there or here or there, it's like turning on a Hollywood movie and you decide, well, today I might start watching the movie at 3 minutes and 16 seconds. Or maybe you'll start watching at 52 minutes and 8 seconds. And what you expect from starting there and watching like 3 minutes of it, you'll understand the book. It's not going to happen, is it? And so many people struggle with this book. The crazy thing in my journey has been is that this is the first book of the Bible that I read. And when I read it, I thought that John took more drugs than I ever did. I have come to appreciate this book immensely. But if you look at this book, there are 22 chapters in the way it's been broken up in the translation. There were no original chapters and verses. It was just one big long story. But for the sake of referencing, chapters and verses were added. When we think about this context of this great final conflict, and that's really what the Revelation is, it's describing how there's been a history of this good and bad, there's right and wrong, there's life and death, have been fighting and fighting between God and his enemy, and you get right down to the end, and that's what Revelation is pulling back the veil on. That's what the Greek word means, pull back the veil on. So in the context of this book, these are the chapters that hint at economic prediction. So you can see it's not the major story of the book, is it? But it is definitely a supporting sub-story to the overarching story. So remember, the overarching story is good and evil, right and wrong, life and death. But finance is hinted at as a subplot to that story. And so what we're looking at tonight is the subplot of the story. If you journey with me for the other 8 nights of this series of Masterclass Bible Prophecy, you will see this completely explode as we journey into the other topics. But let's have a look. In the context of this last cosmic conflict, the last scene of it, we're essentially introduced, and this is my word, you won't find it in the Bible, we're introduced to a global world order. And I'll explain why I've chosen those words in just a second. But basically, this global world order is the alliance of three beasts. Now remember, in prophecy, and especially in biblical prophecy, beasts represent kingdoms or powers or systems. So we're seeing that this is not physical beasts that are going to come and be our problem, it'll be powers and systems. So we see one that's called the dragon, one that's called a sea beast because it rises up out of the sea in the story, which is significant. And there's another one that rises up out of the land as compared to the sea, which is also significant. These three work together as what I call a dark trinity. You've heard the word Trinity, right? It's about the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. You know, you've heard that for sure. But this is the opposite of the unity that comes from the good. This is the unity that is representative of all things bad. Does that make sense? And so these three characters have three distinct functions. The dragon in the story is essentially the architect. This is my term. You won't find it in the Bible. And what I mean by that is that in the biblical account, the dragon's the one that creates the scene, creates the story. He's the designer. He is the architect. But the sea beast is the puppet. It's the front man. It's the one the architect puts up at the front for all the world to see and to follow in essence. But the land beast, the one that comes up out of the land, it looks like a lamb, has lamb-like horns. This beast, its role is it has muscle. It has power to make everyone go along with the architect's plan. That's essentially the roles. Now, if you journey with me over the next couple of nights, you're going to see completely biblical evidence and then historical accuracy and future predictions all mishmashed into one to understand the context of this global world order. I want to show you briefly what it says about it. It says, "Then I saw a beast rising up out of the sea." That's that second beast. That's the front man. But notice the front man, it says, "The dragon gave him his" what? So you see why I call the dragon the architect. He's the one in control behind the scenes. He gave him power, he gave him a throne, and gave him authority. But then I saw another beast coming up out of the earth. This is what we call the land beast. And he exercises all the what? Well, the authority of the first beast, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. That's the puppet. That's the second beast. So you can see it hints at this. Now, I've just cut those verses down, all those dots, I trimmed out stuff because I just want to show you those points for this particular part. So there's a couple of questions I want to look at to set the scene for this one prophecy we're going to look at tonight. The question we're going to look at is, how do they control the whole world according to a 2,000-year-old prediction? So this prediction is written by John in that cave in Patmos in 97 AD. That's almost 2,000 years ago. So we're down here, 2,000 years later, almost. So 2,000 years ago, this prophecy claims that these three powers, these three beasts, will come together, form an alliance, and will ultimately achieve control over the world. The question is, and again, don't have to believe a thing I'm saying right now. We're just looking at what the text says. The question we're going to ask the text is, well, how do they control the whole world? What's the text say? What's the prediction say? Here's what it says. First, there's two ways it's going to do it. One, global economic control. That's the first. We'll look at the second in a second. Here's the first. It says he causes, this is the second beast, that land beast, one that has the muscle. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a what? A mark. But notice, free and slave, rich and poor. How do you define who's rich and poor? What metric are you using? You're using economics. And between free and slave, generally in the old world, again, remember this is a 2,000-year-old writing, if you were rich or poor, free or slave, it was economic. And also if you were small or great in society, it was because of economics. Then it says, continues on, it says that no one may what? Buy or sell except the one who has the mark. So I want you to look at this. If we look at this verse at its core essence, what it's claiming is is that at some point, again, written 2,000 years ago, thereabouts, at some point in the future of 97 AD, there will be these three powers coming together, and the third of the three powers will attempt, if actually it seems to actually do it, not just attempt it, but it will enforce a no buy, no sell, except. Now, I want you to look at these three words, or these 3 points, and I want you to look at a synonym for each of them. When it says that no one's going to be able to buy or sell, what it's implying is that this is a global issue. It affects everyone. Does that make sense? Next, it says no one may be able to buy or, that's a synonym for economics. So we have an issue here of global economics. But the last point here is no one will be able to buy or sell, except in programming, an exception is a control point. It's a point of difference between whether something goes that way or that way. Can you buy or can you sell depends on the control. So this 2,000-year-old prediction is claiming that sometime in the future, there will be a power that will have the ability to introduce global, say it with me, economic control. Do you remember what the first fear of Thomas Friedman was? If we end up in a world where we're digitally connected, we're financially connected, and we're technologically connected, what was his first fear? Global economic control. His second fear was global meltdown. So the book of Revelation is claiming, and by the way, John's very clear. John claims this came from Jesus Christ himself. You don't have to believe that for a second, but that's what he claims. So he's claiming, Jesus Christ appeared to me in this cave, gave me a vision, and told me that at some point in the future, there will be a third beast, this land-like beast with these 2 lamb-like horns, who will be able to introduce global economic control. That's the claim. For the last 2,000 years, scholars of the Bible and skeptics of the Bible have said, what a load of rubbish. Because you know how many powers in the history of 2,000 years have been able to introduce global economic control? 0. No kingdom has ever been able to do this. No power, no state, no one, no religion. And yet the claim is still there. So either this is a hoax or it might be supernatural. Well, let's test it. That was the first mechanism for control, global economic control. The second one is physical coercion. Now, I'll tell you right now, this may feel a bit scary right now, okay? But bear with me, because this is the most exciting thing you'll ever learn in your life, probably. I'm excited by this. I'm not terrified by this for a second. I'm not terrified. Let me show you. So physical coercion, this is what it says about that third beast, the muscle. It says he, that third beast, was granted power to cause. The word cause here in the original Greek language is force. If I cause you to do something, I've forced you to do it. And what is it that he's forcing? He's forcing that as many as would not worship, they should be killed. That's physical coercion. So we saw economic coercion, and now we're seeing physical coercion. Again, written 2,000 years ago thereabouts. You don't have to believe it, but I'm just showing you what it says. So here's the question. The prophecy claims that there will be these 3 that will come together, this dark trinity form. Their goal will be to have global control. The 2 ways they're going to do it is through global economic control and physical coercion. The question is, what for? What's the purpose according to John, this 2,000-year-old prediction? John claims that Jesus told him, and here's what he claims Jesus told him. Again, you don't have to believe a second. Don't believe it for a second. This is all it says. The claim is that the reason they want all this force and coercion economically and physically is for global worship or allegiance. Now, when I first read this, I was an atheist, and I thought, you guys have lost the plot. Maybe in the old world where everyone had some deity in their life, like whether you're a Greek or a Roman or whatever, but now we're civilized. We have evangelical atheists. We'll never, ever agree with a global religious or alliance system. Forget it. And maybe that's what your view is tonight, and that's perfectly legitimate. But let's see what it says. It says, and all the world marveled and followed the beast. That's the puppet. That's the front man, the second beast. They followed the second beast. So they what? They worshipped the dragon, that's the architect, who gave authority to the beast. So they're worshipping the, oh, great architect, oh, great, that's my words, by the way, hey, you great dragon, you great architect. But why are they worshipping that? Because of the front man. Because everyone's going, wow, the front man's so great, he's so wonderful, he's so amazing. But by doing that, they're actually worshipping the architect, the dragon, who gave authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast. That's the front man, the puppet. So they're worshipping the puppet, and by doing that, they're actually worshipping the architect. And then it says, and he, this is now the land beast, the muscle one, he causes, that's forces, the earth and those who dwell in it to what? To worship the first beast. So again, I'm not telling you have to believe any of this. You can go hear a bunch of cuckoo, that's fine, but it's still written in your book that was 2,000 years old. It's claiming that in the not too distant future, from John's perspective, at some point there's going to be these three powers coming together, forming this global alliance. They're going to have distinct roles, but the ultimate goal is allegiance. That's the ultimate goal. And what is the result of them achieving this control, according to this 2,000-year-old prediction? Here's what it says. The result is a global economic meltdown. This is in Revelation. Let me show you what it says. Revelation 18. It says, the merchants of the earth, what would you call those people? The businesses, the traders. What will they do? They will weep and mourn. Why? For no one buys their merchandise anymore, for in 1 hour their great riches came to. So if the merchants of the earth are now weeping because everything they had is worth nothing, what would you call that? A global economic meltdown. So that's the good news. Let's have a look. But the question I ask myself as an atheist, by the way, the stuff I'm showing now, I wasn't religious when I came up with this stuff. This is just what was written in a 2,000-year-old book. But I asked myself this question, this isn't possible, surely. It's 2002 when I was reading this for the first time. There's no way in the world that the everyday Aussie is going to go along with what the government says. Not a chance. Why are you laughing? I mean, we love our Holden cars, which we don't make anymore, football, and meat pies, right? You know that song. Maybe you're too young. There's this old song. That's what Australia's about. Football, meat pies, and Holden cars. There's no way. But anyway, is this really possible? This is a 2,000-year-old prediction. Is this really, really possible? Surely. This is just a bunch of fairy tales. Let's have a look, shall we, at the three things. Global economic control, physical coercion, and global economic meltdown. Is this possible? Let's have a look. First one. To have a global economic control, there are two things you would need. You would need, first of all, a global what kind of system? You can't control finances globally unless it's financially globally connected, right? That's the first thing. The second thing you would need to do is you would need a controllable currency system. If you don't have those two things, there is no way in the world you're going to be able to have global economic control. Does that make sense, at least in theory? Yes or no? Let me put it in practicality. If you've got coins in your pocket and I can't control them from India or from South America, then how on earth could that prophecy ever be true? It couldn't. So there's two things you would need. Now, let's talk about this really quickly. I've already told you in my first story, when did a global financial system become a thing? 1999. That's pretty recent compared to 97 AD, but it's still a long way away, isn't it? Here we are, though. We live, in the last almost 30 years now, we've almost lived for 30 years in a global financial system. But what about this controllable currency system? Let's do a quick whirlwind tour. Now, this is the part I'm in danger of going too long on. So just give me this wind-up thing to keep me moving, all right? And if you don't, I will be here for 2 hours. Because I've been studying this thing for the last, well, this part I'm going to show you here is from 2018, but I've been studying this thing since 2011. That's how much history there is on it, how much data there is on it. Let's have a look real quick. By the way, I'm going to show you a series of news reports. And the news reports I'm giving you are not from conspiracy websites. They are from mainstream media, and I'm not saying it's because they're authorities. I'm just telling you that's what the mainstream media is happy for you to know. So don't leave here going, Robbie gave a bunch of conspiracy theory. No, I didn't. I'm going to give you Sydney Morning Herald. I'm going to give you ABC News. I'm going to give you regular Channel 9, Channel 7. I'm not giving you conspiracy sites. So don't leave here going, Robbie gave us no credible sources. I'm even going to give you the Reserve Bank of Australia as a source. So just watch the slides for a second. So this is the new Daddy website in 2018. They came out, and this is why I'm picking 2018, because this is the year that changed in Australian history in the financial sector, whether you recognised it or not, because you might be too busy playing your sports and being distracted with sports scores or something. But here's what it said. Australia's path to a, what kind of society? Cashless society is accelerating, and what's the last word? Inevitable. In what year? 2018, they said that in July. Why did they say that on this website? You've never heard of this web source before. The reason they said it is because ABC reported in the same year, in November, that regulators, financial regulators in Australia, are pushing us into what kind of world? A cashless world, as the Reserve Bank of Australia declares a turning point has been what? So if it's been reached, a turning point's been reached, it is now inevitable. You with me? Now, what are they talking? What's ABC talking about? Well, let's go to the Reserve Bank, shall we? The same month, 2018, this was the current governor, Robert Lowe. He said, a journey towards a near cashless payment system. In 2018, they announced, the Reserve Bank of Australia, which is our banking, this is like the Federal Reserve in the US, this is our version of it in Australia. They introduced a system called NPP, New Payments Platform. That was going to replace the FPOS system that you and I have used for the last 30 years. Now, good news is, they announced it in 2018 that it would be fully operational by guess when? 2020. And good news is that, guess what happened in 2020? It became operational. But you know that already because you were watching the press conferences every day about 6 feet distance and masks, no masks, masks on, masks off. You were distracted by all that stuff to miss what was actually happening behind the scenes. And it wasn't behind the scenes, it's front and center. So what's this system supposed to do? It replaces the back end of the financial structure in Australia to enable a cashless society in the future. And that system is fully operational right now. So that was 2018. In 2019, the next year, beginning of the next year, in June, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia releases a white paper. You can still download it at this URL if you really want to check me out. It's called Turning Point, and what's it say? Calling time on cash. It means basically cash is going to have an end date. This is 2019, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia. I could spend hours digesting the white paper, but let's read a couple of things. On page 4, it says Australia could be cashless by 2026 if the trend revealed by the Reserve Bank of Australia's customer payment survey continues. And they basically are saying that the Reserve Bank has given us data every year of how much is cash and how much is cashless transactions. And if we continue the trajectory by 2026, it's theoretically possible that no one uses cash anymore. That's what the point of that paper is saying. Now, jump forward, that's 2019, let's go to 2020. And again, there's so many articles, you could be here literally for the next 2 hours. In 2020, Sydney Morning Herald, it announces in 2020 in an opinion piece that the coronavirus will accelerate the trend towards a cashless society. Wow, that seems really interesting that it's 2020, that the financial system is operational, and all of a sudden there's a virus now that's going to accelerate the use of cash, cashless. That seems really interesting. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, by the way. I just like to read. Here's what I don't know if you've ever heard the World Economic Forum. This Klaus just retired last week, I think it was, the week before. But this is what he said in 2020. He said, the pandemic represents a rare but narrow opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and to reset our world. And from this, they came out with this great thing called the Great Reset. They released this in June 10, 2020. And basically, the conclusion, I'm sure you've seen the memes if you're following any of this space. The meme is what he said. He says, you will own nothing and you will be happy. That's what the reset's about. It's about taking anyway, I'll get distracted and I'll take you on tangents. But basically the point is this. This is something that every entity around the world is already actively working in and on, and you just may have not have seen it yet. In 2020, in March, Forbes magazine had an article that said the digital dollar and digital wallet bill surfaces in the US Senate. In Australia, we had this bill that came out to give people that were affected by coronavirus $750, a payment, one-off payment. The US was doing something similar, and they put it through the Senate to get it voted, which is basically our upper house, the equivalent over there. And somebody actually read the thousands and thousands of pages, and right there in the back of the document, it suggested that the payment to the people who were going to get these payments from the government, they don't get them as US dollars, but as digital US dollars. And you say, what's the difference? I'll show you the difference, what we're talking about. We're not talking about what you've got now in your CommBank app. It's different. So somebody read it and said, hey, wait, what's this all about? Made the press, and guess what? It was removed from the draft and it was voted without it. Somebody read. But then we come the same month, just a few weeks later, same magazine, Forbes magazine comes out and says, hey, forget that coronavirus stimulus bill with the digital dollar. The digital what? Digital euro is now coming, 2020, because now the Europeans, CBDC, Central Bank Digital Currency Agency comes along and says, hey, wait, we need to go down this digital currency route. We need to start exploring this. But then Fortune magazine comes out in April 2020 and says, this is why the United States shouldn't let who? China dominate the digital currency race. Because in 2020, it seems like Europe, US, and China started a race for digital currency. Again, different to the digital thing you see on your CommBank or Westpac app, whatever apps you're using. I have good news and bad news, depending which way you want to see it, is the race has finished. In 2022, China won the CBDC race. They were the first one to market. They've won it. And it's actively in use in certain parts of China right now. So in 2020, 2 years before China won the race, the Americans are saying, hey, we shouldn't let the Chinese win it. But let's continue on. Sydney Morning Herald, in February 2022, it says, the end of the dollar as we know it, ? Reserve Bank of Australia suggests digital tokens are on the money. What a digital token is a digital currency. And why are they saying this in the Sydney Morning Herald in 2022? Because, well, let me tell you what CBDC is first, and I'll explain why that's important. A CBDC stands for a Central Bank Digital Currency. It means a digital currency issued by, in our case, the Reserve Bank of Australia. Here's the difference. You're all using FPOS right now in terms of the idea that we've had for the last 30 years. You get your card or your phone now or your watch and you tap at the teller and they transfer money through. That's what we think of as FPOS. It's a representation of the physical dollar sitting in the bank. Cryptocurrency, which came along and became very popular from 2013 onwards, is a complete decentralization of that system where the government has no impact or influence at all. So when we talk about digital currencies, we're not talking about Bitcoin. That's cryptocurrency, it's different. What a central bank digital currency is the opposite of crypto. It's taking crypto technology and using it for a government purpose. It's centralizing it once again. But the benefits of this compared to this is that now the Reserve Bank of Australia controls the story, not the individual customers and the individual banks. Let me give you a couple of examples very quickly. You can see here there's control, there's technology, there's currency types and so on. Notice this. The regulation in this world, it's all about unregulated in crypto. In this one, it's completely regulated by the central bank. Now look at privacy. Here, it's recorded by the banks, because the bank's got to know who to pay what to. But in this one, it's the transaction history is recorded by the federal government. Well, not the government, but the Reserve Bank of the government. That's one thing. I mean, it's bad enough that my bank knows that I'm going to Bunnings. But do you really want the Reserve Bank of Australia to know that you went to individual stores? And by the way, this actually supports individual purchases as well, not just stores. Then you go down the bottom here, this is the main advantage. This is the fundamental reason we're going down this path. Programmability. Now, if you have never looked into this space, this is going to do your head in. I want you to think about your dollar, and you take your dollar coin and you go to the shop and you say, I want to buy this piece of chewing gum. And when you go to give the coin to the person, there is nothing they can do except receive that coin for that chewing gum. You with me? But what if you gave that coin to the shopkeeper and the coin got itself a little mouth and said, "No, I can't be used on chewing gum because the person that's using my coin has already bought chewing gum." And the shopkeeper goes, "But I want the coin." "No, you can't use the coin." No matter how many times you throw that coin at the shopkeeper can't receive it because that coin is programmable. That's what we're talking about. So basically, a CBDC is a fully programmable coin. It's something that can be used. I'll give you an example. This is a real case example that's in the white papers on CBDCs. You've all heard of the carbon problem in the world, I'm sure. And basically, one of the examples they give in the white paper for CBDCs is this. We would be able to stop people from purchasing train tickets if they have purchased too many tickets, or train, plane, doesn't matter what it is. If they've already got their quota of CO2 emission and all their traveling, we can stop them from purchasing anything else in that category until they reset their credit amount and then go again. Another example is we can stop inflation. See, when the COVID thing happened and people were getting all this money, they weren't spending. And so inflation has gone up. That's the theory they're giving us, but anyway. And so the result now is that there's too much money in people's hands and that's pushing the prices up. That's their theory. And so the solution in the white paper says that we can make the payments we give the people expire. So imagine this. You're on Centrelink, you get $750, but you've got 1 month to spend it. And if you don't spend it, it disappears. That's what a programmable currency is. It's a controllable currency. So, why did they say in the Sydney Morning Herald the Reserve Bank of Australia is calling time on cash? Because in 2002, in August, they announced a trial for a central bank digital currency. This was the time that everyone was fighting over vaccines and fighting over, what's the other things, the masks and the lockdowns. This is this period. While all that's happening, on the Sydney Morning Herald, they just go, "Oh, actually, and by the way, do you know the Reserve Bank of Australia is going to do a trial on central bank digital currencies?" You remember this stuff, right? I guarantee you don't remember this. But you'll remember all the announcements from our premiers and our chief health officers. Central Bank has concerns. 6 months into the trial, the Reserve Bank of Australia says, "Hey, actually, we're doing this trial for 6 months so far, and we've actually identified some concerns." Here's the concern they identified. The Reserve Bank of Australia believes that it, a central bank digital currency, will replace the Australian dollar, ultimately avoiding commercial banks fully. You know what that means? It means that you don't have to have a bank account anymore with all these different banks because the Reserve Bank of Australia issues the coin into a wallet that they have and you have with them. So why would you need a Commonwealth Bank or a Westpac or whatever? So they're saying, we have a concern that if we go down this path, we might actually cut out the banks. So they've been trying to figure out how do the banks still have a part to play in all of this. That's where we are right now in the conversation. News.com.au says in 2023, digital currency tested by CBA and ANZ as the Reserve Bank of Australia seeks to stave off the threat of cryptocurrency. Anyway, I could keep going ages with this. Let me keep going. This is Fortune magazine, the crypto section. It says, central bank currencies are what? Coming, whether we want them or not. Should we be worried about them? In 2023, Japan announces the launch of a new central bank digital currency pilot this April. Crypto magazine in 2002 says federal chairman, this is of the US Reserve, confirms that a US CBDC would not be anonymous. That means every transaction the government will have access to. When I say government, I mean the reserve entity, the Reserve Bank entity. This is MRIT, a university in Australia that did a study in 2023 and said the move towards a cashless society is well underway. This is not fairy tale, this isn't fiction, this isn't scaremongering. This is reading what we are being told in the mainstream media today in Australia. It said this is in 2003. Study shows 130 countries are exploring central bank digital currencies. 130 countries. This is the Reserve Bank of Australia. I took this website snapshot this afternoon. just to show you that I'm not making this stuff up. This is the Reserve Bank of Australia. This is our CB. This is our central bank. They've got a section called Central Bank Digital Currency, and it says the Reserve Bank is actively researching central bank digital currency, CBDC, as a complement. It's right there. There's a website called cbdctracker.org where they track what all the countries are doing at what stages. This is in 2023, and the colours represent different stages, so whether it's research, proof of concept, pilot, launch, and so on. In 2023 in April, we were in research. The last update was last month, April 2025. We are now in proof of concept. The next step is pilot and then launch. And you can see how all the other countries are progressing as well. There's only 2 countries, here and here, that have said, no, we're not going to bother with it. There are countries today where it's actually active. In fact, I'll show you one in just a second that's actually active. This is 2024, Macquarie Bank to go fully digital. Daily Mail, a real conspiracy website, right? They gave customers, they had 10 days from when it was announced that they would no longer have cash in any of their bank branches. And their recommendation was transfer it to somewhere else and get it out if you want cash. This is from China to show you how advanced China has become with their CBDCs. In 2004, last year, they had a typhoon, very bad typhoon, lost power for weeks. It was so bad that they couldn't get electricity that nobody could buy anything because no one could charge their phones, because everything now in that part is on the CBDC. So a part of the emergency relief was to bring generators to the street corners so people could come. I don't know if you can see it, but there's hundreds of phones being charged so that they can get enough power to do their CBDC transactions in China. So this isn't some fairy tale for the future. In parts of the world, it's already started to happen. Nine News said in 2003, strongest sign yet, Australia headed towards a totally cash society. I don't know if you remember this story. People went to the bank to withdraw money from Commonwealth Bank. They had no money. They had no money in the branch. Under Biden in 2002, an executive order on ensuring responsible development of digital assets, he says, my administration places the highest urgency on research, development efforts, and the potential design and deployment options of a United States central bank digital currency. When you see that, there's one thing you need to remember: controllable currency. Now, here's a guy in a cave 2,000 years ago. I see a time. Jesus is showing me, the prophet who became known as the Son of God, he's gone to heaven, he's come to me, and he's telling me that at some point there will be a controllable economic control around the world. For that to happen, you'd have to have controllable currency. And now, since 2020, it's becoming a thing. Not before 2020, since 2020. There were foundations laid as 2018. People have been laughing and pointing at this verse going, what a load of rubbish, that's insane, never possible, rah, 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 rah. And now all of a sudden in the present we're going, whoa. There's a famous podcaster called Joe Rogan, an American guy, and he's had a number of he's not religious. He's had a number of people interviewed on his podcast over the last 2 or 3 years, and they're saying, these are secular people going, dude, this is a quote, this stuff's looking pretty freaky. And Joe Rogan goes, why? It sounds a lot like the Revelations. And then Joe Rogan reads Revelation, we just read it on the podcast, going, whoa, that sounds just like it. So my point is, there's something happening now that echoes 2,000-year-old words. I'll skip some of this. This one here is the highest organization of reconciliation of funds transfer globally. And this organization is saying if we can get this thing working where every region has a CBDC, we should attempt to tokenize every asset on Earth. Meaning this, no longer will you have a piece of deed that represents your house ownership or a car or motorcycle or bus or something, whatever you own, it'll all be on the blockchain. And what that means is that when you go to sell your house, you may or may not be able to sell it to the person you choose to sell it to, based on the conditions of the sale at the time. So that's what that's talking about. Let's keep moving. SWIFT, which is the international transfer. You've done a bank transfer internationally, you have to do a SWIFT code. SWIFT announced last year, 2024, that they are launching a new central bank digital currency platform within the next 12 to 24 months to enable all the CBDCs around the globe to interchange their funds. So it's the glue of the network in essence. And there's more on SWIFT. This is last month. In South Korea, they are trialing the CBDCs in 7-Elevens, which if you know Korea and Asia in general, 7-Eleven is like your one-stop shop for everything. It's where your packages come, it's where you pay your bills, it's where you get your food and that sort of thing. And so they have started trialing the acceptance of their CBDCs in South Korea. And you'll get a discount if you use it. So if you want to get some savings, just use the CBDC as the trial. This is March 29, 2025. When was that? Like 3 days ago? I was in Dubai I got back from Dubai last night. And in Dubai, in UAE, they are rolling out their CBDC at the fourth quarter of this year, Dubai. And so they're wanting to work with China's one, and they're basically trying to cut out the American dollar completely. This stuff is happening right now as we speak. And yet I've got a book that echoes these words that's 2,000 years old. So that's the first part. Is it possible that we might enter in a world where there's global economic control? I think so. But what about the second one? Physical coercion. Surely that's impossible. Now, I'm showing you this. I'm not saying pro or anti-vax. That's not my point. My point is this. Look at the language that was communicated, not just here, but anywhere. The language was, do this, and you will get this result. Don't do this, and you will get this result. That's called coercion. Now, I'm not pro or anti. I couldn't care less about that part of the story. The point I'm trying to make is, 2,000 years ago, a dude in a cave is saying, hey, I see some things that Jesus is telling me. I sound like a hippie, don't I, in a cave? We're down here, and all of a sudden, in the space of a couple of months, the entire globe was speaking the same language. And it wasn't just about that. It was, don't do this, don't do that. What about this one? Don't do this, don't do that. This is called physical coercion. Don't do this, don't do that. Don't do this, don't do that. You get the point, right? So is it possible that we could live in a time and a place where the entire planet is open and susceptible to not just economic control, but also physical coercion? I think we've demonstrated that's possible. Now, by the way, everything that happened during the era of COVID, that's got nothing to do with these predictions that I'm talking about. What I'm suggesting is that it shows us the foundation for these principles are laid. There's a big difference, and I hope you understand that. So the third one is it possible to have a global economic meltdown? Well, I think that's pretty obvious if you've lived through the GFC. I was in Asia when this hit, and it hit pretty bad. I know in Australia it was pretty mild for most people. 2020, we had $140 billion wiped off the face of the stock market simply because something happened in China. This was the beginning of 2020. Then they've been predicting inflation to remain until 2025. We're now there. Economic Times is predicting a major recession coming, and it's still supposed to still be coming. So is it possible? Yes. If we think of what happened in 2008, there was a crisis in the US housing market on the other side of the globe, but because we're globally connected, all of a sudden we're all losing values in prices down here. So the last part of this we're going to look at is what about that spiritual element? I mean, okay, that's pretty freaky that he made some predictions, according to Jesus, and it sounds like the world we're living in for the first time in human history. But there's no way the world's going to go along with this spiritual thing. Come on, that seems pretty far-fetched. This guy wrote, Sir Arnold Toynbee, he wrote these massive volume on the history of civilizations, and I'll save you the point. He was studying why they fall, why do civilizations fall, whether it's the ancient Romans or the Greeks or the Egyptians, Mesopotamian, whatever, it doesn't matter, Aztecs, he studied them all. Why did they fall? I'll save you the point of reading all those books. There's one reason why they fall. Here's what he says. The fundamental conflict is not political, but religious. In every civilization that has ever fallen, it has been because of a religious dimension, not a political one. And he talks about how that it basically doesn't matter if you're born a Republican or a Democratic or a Labor or a Green or a Liberal, whatever. Inside, it's a spiritual issue that drives your compass. And if you look at the recent conflicts in at least my lifetime, it's fascinating. When I was a kid, it was always Northern Ireland and the Protestants and the Catholics, religious. Or there's Bosnia, Serbia, and Croatia, Muslim, Orthodox, Catholics. War on terror was Islam against Christianity. You go to Kashmir, it's the Muslims versus the Hindus. It's funny, every other day I'm in an Uber and I've got either a Pakistani or an Indian driver many times, and I always like to ask them the same questions. And you get two very different perspectives, but it comes down to religious views. In the Middle East right now, it's a three-way fight between Orthodox Jews, US Protestants, and Muslims. Every single thing seems to have a spiritual element to it. And so, if you look to the greatest country on earth that has been, at least in my lifetime, it's not looking so great now, even though they call themselves great again, right? There's no way it could happen in the United States. After all, they have a separation of politics and religion, or church and state. In fact, the United States was the first of its kind. It was called the American experiment because it was the first government to form a new idea, which was to separate religion and politics, because the old world had only ever known that. So surely that wouldn't be happening in the United States. It was based on two great strengths, freedom of religion and freedom of political power, and they distinctly put a wall of separation between the two powers. But is that wall possible to crumble? Let's see what the Americans say about themselves. This is a former Supreme Chief Justice, which is the highest level of interpreting the Constitution of the United States. And he said that the wall of separation between the church and state is a metaphor based on some bad history. His point is it doesn't have to be this way. We can have them combined. It's just because of some bad history we have this legacy. And there's been pieces written since 2003. This was primarily at the height of George W. Bush and how everyone was, God bless America, God bless the troops. And the question was, is the church-state wall crumbling? And they say, look, what President Bush has been able to do with the United States people, it is blurring the lines between the separation of church and state. But as we move along, this is now 2022, just a few years ago, CNN reported, brick by brick, the wall between religion and government is collapsing in America. In the United States, the things that separate them is now being dropped and they're now combining. Now, if the United States, the country founded on the separation of religious and political values, crumbles and fails and comes back into a merged state, what hope is there for anybody else? Our country, if you open up our Constitution, read the introduction, we thank the Americans for inspiring our constitutional document. So if theirs falls, what's it say about ours? 2022, US Supreme Court takes aim of separation of church and state. Basically, they start reversing some of the church-state issues so that the church can have more influence in the state, in essence. Washington Post, 2022, under right-leaning Supreme Court, the church-state wall is what? So the question was asked 20 years before, is it crumbling? 20 years later, they're saying it is crumbling. If the greatest nation on earth is crumbling in this area, then is it possible that we could have a global problem in this space? The answer is yes. Project 2025, before Trump came in, had a great concern, the people who were critics of it. They said legal experts have said it would undermine the rule of law, the separation of power, separation of church and state. So they're all freaked out. Now, liberals will always freak out over conservatives and vice versa. That's normal. But the liberals look at this document and say, if this stuff happens, we don't see a difference between church and state. It's all coming together. And there's a website, I forget the name of it, but there's a website that tracks how many of the things in Project 2025 Trump has done, and it's looking pretty good in terms of getting the green tick, 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 if you're of that persuasion. Let me say something very clearly. I am against church and state being together, because the minute that happens, someone gets persecuted. So, as we conclude this, why these prophecies? This is only one of 1,817. I want to show you why there's the 9 elements first, then we'll look at why. We have to have the architect, the front man, the muscle. They form a global alliance. Then we end up with global financial system, global economic control, global coercion. That leads to a spiritual issue on global scale and will result in a global economic collapse. Now, have all those things happened yet? No. But this has happened. This is happening. We've seen the groundwork for that being laid, so all of that is theoretically now possible for the first time in 2,000 years since this thing was written. We can see these three actors already playing on the world stage. You say, who are they? I say, come back. We'll cover that in the course of the rest of the masterclass series. And these last two issues here, we're already seeing this stuff starting to raise its ugly head, and we've tasted little glimpses of that, but the predictions are clear. There's troubling times ahead. But this is either just pure luck, that the guy in the cave just fluked it and got something that sounds remarkably like the present for the first time in 2,000 years, or this is supernatural. When you start looking at more and more of those 1,817 predictions, you start to run out of the option of it being luck. It starts looking very prophetic. So the question was, why these things? This is what an Old Testament Dead Sea Scroll of Jeremiah says. It says, this is supposed to be God speaking, the author of these predictions. He says, I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you what kind of future? Hope. Some people go, I can't read this stuff. It scares the life out of me. This is really interesting as I bring this to a conclusion. The person Jesus in the New Testament Gospels, he claims that God the Father is the Father of fathers for us. And he says, look, you guys are fathers, you guys are parents and mothers and fathers, and you guys are messed up. But you would never give a bad gift to your children. If your child asks you for food, you're not going to give them a scorpion to eat, right? You're going to do something good for them. But you're all messed up children, messed up parents, but you still take care of your children. Now, how much more, this is Jesus speaking, he says, how much more does your heavenly Father take good care of us? Now, if that's true, I want to ask you a question, men. Would you ever walk into your child's bedroom to give them a bed night story and intentionally walk in there and give them the scariest, most horrible view of a story for the purpose of scaring them? And if you answer yes, be careful because your wife might have words with you on the way home. I'd like to think that you're a good father like me. You'd never do that to your children in a bedtime story. Yes or no? One more time. Yes or no? You don't know what to say yes or no. Would you ever intentionally scare your children in a story? No. Okay, good. Just checking. So if that's the case, the author of this book is supposed to be the great Father of heaven. So if he's giving us this really scary stuff, it can't be to scare our pants off, so to speak. So what's it for? It's to give us hope. Why does it give us hope? Because, this is what Jesus says. He says, now I have told you before it comes. And in the context, it's talking about prediction, future, prophecy. I've told you before it comes to pass. Why? So that when it does come to pass, you may believe. You know what that implies? When Jesus gave the predictions, there was an element of doubt, unbelief. But they held his words until they saw it happening, and then they remembered his words, and then that strengthened their faith. So this stuff's not to scare you. This stuff is to go, whoa! He said this 2,000... By the way, tonight the G represents this book. G stands for gift. If you would like this gift tonight, I want you to put a tick or a cross or color or circle, but do the G. I'll show you what I mean by that.